I'm gonna show to you, my fellow chessers, the chess game between Gukesh and Ediz Gurel in FIDE Grand Swiss 2025, round number 7. Hello, my fellow chessers. We're back at it again with another video, my fellow chessers. So let's begin on E4, C6. So this is Karukan defense, my fellow chessers. D4, D5, E5. So this is Karukan defense, advanced variation, my fellow chessers. All right. Bishop F5, H4, H5, C4. So this is Karukan defense, advanced tal variation, my fellow chessers. All right, correct my pronunciation if I'm wrong. All right. So thank you. E6. Thank you so much. I just appreciate it. So knight C3. So knight C3. Knight E7. Knight E2 or knight G E2. Knight D7. Knight G3, attacking the bishop on F5, my fellow chessers. All right. Bishop G6. Bishop G5, attacking the knight, the same time pinning the knight on E7, my fellow chessers. All right. Queen B6, attacking the pawn on B2, my fellow chessers. All right. Rook C1. Wow. F6, attacking the bishop on G5, my fellow chessers. All right. E takes F6, my fellow chessers. G takes F6. Bishop E3. Good move. So queen takes B2, my fellow chessers. C takes D5. Knight takes D5. Knight takes D5. E takes D5. Bishop D3, attacking the bishop on G6, my fellow chessers. Alright. Bishop B4. Check, my fellow chessers. King F1. Wow. Why? Like for example, what if Bishop D2? Bishop D2. We have Bishop takes D3, as you can see, my fellow chessers, and the evaluation bar here. Black is winning, my fellow chessers. That's why Ediz gurel moved the king to F1, my fellow chessers. Let's go to the real game, which is King F1, my fellow chessers. Alright. Bishop takes D3. Queen takes D3. Castles, queen side, my fellow chessers of Gukesh. Rook B1, attacking the queen on B2, my fellow chessers. Alright. Queen A3, challenging the queen on D3, my fellow chessers. Rook B3, very good move of Ediz gurel, my fellow chessers, attacking the queen on A3, my fellow chessers. Alright. Queen A4. King G1. Oh, like artificial castle, my fellow chessers. Alright, do you know what's artificial castle, my fellow chessers? Anyway, let's go. Bishop D6. Bishop D6, attacking the knight on G3, my fellow chessers. Alright. Knight F5, attacking the bishop on D6, my fellow chessers. Bishop C7. G3. Wow. Knight B6, my fellow chessers. What's the idea? Go here on C4 to go here. Anyway, let's go. Let's continue the game. King G2, my fellow chessers. Knight C4, attacking the bishop on E3, my fellow chessers. Alright. Rook B1 or Rook H or Rook H B1, my fellow chessers. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is Bishop H6 or Rook A1 or Rook A1 or Bishop H6, my fellow chessers. The top engine move is Bishop H6, my fellow chessers. Wow. Anyway, let's continue the real game, which is Rook H B1, right? B6, alright, because B7 is under attack, my fellow chessers, alright. A3, what's the idea of A3 to go here? Something like that. What's the idea? Let's go. Rook A1 or Rook D E1. Rook D E1, my fellow chessers, alright. Bishop H6. Rook e4 of Gukesh. Mistake. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is king b7 or rook e6 or rook h g8, my fellow chessers. The top engine move is king b7, my fellow chessers. The strongest engine in the world, my fellow chessers. I mean, in the chess, on the chess, all right? But let's continue the real game, which is rook to e4 of Gukesh. Queen d1, mistake of Ediz Gurel, my fellow chessers. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is rook c1, my fellow chessers. Rook c1 or rook c3 or queen f3, my fellow catchers. The top engine move is rook c1, my fellow catchers. All right, rook c1. Rook c3, rook c3. Sorry. Anyway, let's continue the game, which is queen d1, queen d1. Knight a5, attacking the rook on b3, my fellow catchers. All right. Rook f3, queen takes f d1, yeah. Queen takes d1, rook takes d1, or queen to queen, my fellow chessers. Rook h7, what's the idea, my fellow chessers? Anyway, bishop g7, my fellow chessers. Rook e6, all right. Bishop f8, knight c4, attacking the pawn on a3, my fellow chessers. All right. So let's continue the game. Knight g7, my fellow chessers, attacking the rook on e6, my fellow chessers. All right. Rook e2, my fellow chessers. What's the idea? Attacking the pawn on f2 or preparing for rook a2, something like that. King f1, my fellow chessers. Rook g4. Okay. Rook g4, attacking the pawn on g4 at the same time, attacking the rook on g1, my fellow chessers. All right. Rook e1, my fellow chessers, controlling the e file, my fellow chessers. Rook d4. Ooh, or rook takes d4. Rook takes f6, my fellow chessers. c5, my fellow chessers. All right, c5. Rook f5, attacking the pawn on g5, my fellow chessers. So rook knight g2, attacking the king, my fellow chessers. King to g2, knight e4, my fellow chessers. What's the idea? To go here, something like that. We're covering this file, my fellow chessers. Alright. So knight takes h5, my fellow chessers. Alright. c4. Knight f6, attacking the knight on e4, my fellow chessers. Knight takes f6. Knight takes f6, rook takes f6, my fellow chessers. d3 mistake, or rook d3 mistake of Gukesh, my fellow chessers. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is rook d2, rook g4, or king b7, my fellow chessers. The top engine move is rook d2, my fellow chessers. All right. Let's continue the real game, which is d3, my fellow chessers. Rook d3, h5. Wow. Bishop g8, my fellow chessers. Mistake of Gukesh, my fellow chessers. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is c3, or king b7 again, my fellow chessers. Why Gukesh didn't take the, like for example, rook takes h5, my fellow chessers. We have rook f7, my fellow chessers, and then we have king to d8. We have bishop g7, and we have g4. That's the continuation of computer, my fellow chessers. And as you can see, my fellow chessers, white is winning on this position, my fellow chessers. All right, but let's continue the real game, which is bishop g8, mistake. Rook f5, mistake. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is rook d6 or rook c6 or rook h6, my fellow chessers. Based on computer engine, my fellow chessers. Right, my fellow chessers. Anyway, rook f5, c3, h6, my fellow chessers. g4, rook c1, my fellow chessers. Rook d2. Wow. Okay. King f1, mistake of Ediz gurel, my fellow chessers. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is g4 or king f3, my fellow chessers. Alright. So let's continue the real game, which is king f1, my fellow chessers, and we have bishop e7 Wow. Anyway, G4. Bishop takes a3. Mistake or blunder of Gukesh, my fellow chessers. The best continuation on this position, my fellow chessers, is wait, is king to uh king to b7 or bishop takes f8 or rook b2, my fellow chessers. All right, but let's continue the real game, which is bishop takes a3. As you can see, the double question mark, my fellow chessers. All right, that's the sign of blunder of the of player, my fellow chessers. All right. Anyway, let's continue the real game. Blunder of Gukesh, and then bishop takes a3. My fellow chessers, white is one bishop up. My fellow chessers, all right. And at the same time, as you can see here, the evaluation bar, white is winning. My fellow chessers, all right, fellow chessers. Anyway, rook takes h6, g4, my fellow Kachashas attacking the rook on h6, rook g6, king g2, mistake. The best continuation on this position is rook f7, or rook e1, or king g1. Anyway, let's go to the game, which is king g2, rook g7, mistake. The best continuation of this position is king b7 or a5 or rook d3, my fellow chessers. All right. Anyway, rook g7, bishop d6, a5, bishop c5, bishop f4, attacking the rook on d1, d2, my fellow chessers. All right. Let's go to the real game. Rook d8, rook d3, rook d3, and rook b1. Gukesh resigns the game. Why? As you can see, the evaluation bar, white is winning, and as you can see, my fellow chessers. All right, one bishop up of white, and in this position, my fellow chessers. All right. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say, my fellow chessers. All right, correct me if I'm wrong, my fellow chessers, and like, comment, subscribe, my fellow chessers. Here, my fellow chessers. And here, my fellow chessers, all right? Chessers TV official team, my fellow chessers. So like, comment, and subscribe. To God be all the glory. Praise Lord Jesus Christ.